I believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. Those who advance the hypothesis that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered and then his murder covered up by a fake suicide need to address the question of Jeffrey Epstein's previous suicide attempt in that jail. So according to the conventional view, Jeffrey Epstein attempted suicide, was then put on suicide watch, and then a couple of weeks later successfully committed suicide. Now, if you believe that the second incident was an assassination, you have to address the question of the first incident. Do you believe that the first incident was also an assassination, which simply failed? Or do you believe that that was a real suicide attempt, and the one after was the actual assassination? Now, I believe that the notion that he tried to commit suicide, almost succeeded, and then 2 weeks later, when we find him hanging in his cell, it was not a suicide but a murder, I find that notion entirely absurd. If he was inclined to kill himself before, then he would still be inclined to kill himself a couple of weeks later, and would be more likely to succeed, considering that he almost succeeded the first time. Now, if they were both assassinations and one simply failed, well, then you have to ask the question, what are the capacities of the assassins who managed to try to assassinate this guy, fail, and then not have it leak out in the intervening 2 weeks before they get to try again? Those capacities, I submit, are vastly larger than the capacities you would need to stop the annoying leaks that we've seen, or the annoying reports that we've seen from Epstein's death, that do seem to point to malfeasance. So lots of rumors have been swirling around, including that Epstein's cell had its camera malfunction during the hanging, which was just false. There was the rumor that Jeffrey Epstein was on suicide watch when he was killed, or when he committed suicide, which was just false. There was the rumor that Jeffrey Epstein had been taken off suicide watch earlier than most prisoners would be taken off suicide watch, or earlier than procedure would indicate. This was just false. There was the notion that Jeffrey Epstein had these broken bones in his neck, which indicate that he was murdered instead of hanging himself. In fact, those bones being broken, especially in an older man who had horizontal pressure on his neck, that does not indicate that he didn't hang himself. That's exactly what you'd expect to happen if he had hung himself in the manner described. But any agents or any entity with a capacity to hide for 2 weeks while this guy is alive and talking about how people came into his cell and tried to kill him, and he survived, right? Anyone who can cover that up can stop those inconvenient leaks from happening very easily. Like, comparatively speaking, it's very, very, very easy to clean up these leaks, quote unquote, these putative leaks, which indicate to people who believe the hypothesis that he was murdered. It's much easier to clean up those leaks than to keep it from leaking during the 2 weeks where he's alive after the attempted murder, after the attempt on his life. So we also have to look at the question of motive. Like, what was the motive of those who were supposed to have murdered Epstein? Some people say, it was a cover-up. It was an attempt to stop him from talking. Well, this really doesn't make that much sense. If people were worried about Epstein talking, then we already did this in 2008. He already was arrested. He already got off and was fine and didn't do any more incriminating than happened. And the damage was essentially done. Like, everything is pretty much known. We know about people getting on this Lolita Express. We know about people going to this island. We know what people would be worried about getting out. And the time to murder Epstein was before all that gets out. And another time to murder Epstein would be before he gets arrested again. So in the intervening years between his first arrest and his second arrest, that's a very good time to whack him, especially when he's out of the country, when his security is not as good. Murdering him while he's in this detention facility is the course of action that has the greatest chance of getting you caught. And there's no particular reason to risk this, especially when he didn't talk the last time, and when killing him makes the investigation, draws a lot more attention to the investigation and gives the investigation more powers, because a dead man doesn't have the same rights. The investigation can proceed with far less restrictions when there are no constitutional rights of the person being investigated, of the person's properties, of the person's information, and so I don't think it makes any sense at all for them to murder Epstein. And I believe that an entity which could murder Epstein and get away with it would be far more powerful than is necessary to squelch the inconvenient leaks that have come out. Now, we also have to look at other cases where we might believe that such things happen, that the public was misled. So I believe that the public was misled, during several events: the Gulf of Tonkin, Lusitania. I think the Syrian gas attacks recently, and the features of these misleading events are that you can't get away, or it's not mainstream to talk about them being suspicious, right? You're unpatriotic if you talk about them being suspicious. There is that degree of control over the media that for a little while they can make it so that a story is pushed and pushed really hard. Now, eventually things do leak out. The truth tends to kind of leach like radiation from a contaminated site, but it takes time. And for a while, if we have the organs of the state pushing for something, they can push it. That's not a problem for them. If they really want to push something, they can push it, and they can make it so that only non-mainstream sources are talking about it being, the truth. Only non-mainstream sources are talking about some sort of event in the way that the state doesn't want. This doesn't work indefinitely, but it works for a little while. And is this happening in the Epstein case? No, you're seeing the entire media ablaze with how this was very suspicious. And the entities that are supposed to have the power to carry out this hit without being caught, and possibly carry out a hit twice, and have the victim alive and talking about it for 2 weeks, and still get away with it, and still have no whisper of that get out, and still have no issues. Such entities are enormously powerful, and they essentially have to be state entities. They have to be very deep with the organs of the state, and such entities, if they needed to, could do far more than is indicated by all the information and all the hubbub that we see immediately following this death. Also, usually, when you're trying to fake something, you have some motivation and you're pushing something. So if you're faking some sort of act of war, then immediately following that, you're going to go to war. You're going to do something that you can excuse through this fake act, right? And by the time it's realized that the act is fake, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, because you've already done what you need to do. That's how it makes sense to fake things. Faking Epstein's death in this manner, it's like you have this problem where the truth tends to leak over time, and in this case, it just ends up pinning you with a murder when all of the information, all the core information had already leaked, right? We already had all these associations leaked, and this had happened in 2008. And, now you killed a guy, bring a huge amount of heat on the entire situation, bring a huge amount of public attention on the entire situation, and, what have you erased? You haven't erased anything. You haven't solved any problem for yourself. You just created an enormous problem for yourself. It doesn't make any sense, right? If hits on people to stop them from talking make sense from criminal organizations, they don't make sense from individuals with the powers that are bestowed on these wrongdoers by the conspiracy theorists. If you already have these sorts of powers that the conspiracy theorists give to Epstein's would-be assassins, then you don't need to assassinate Epstein in the first place. It doesn't make any sense. And the more you think about it, the more it unravels. And I'll be called a shill for this. I'll be called someone who's always pushing the official narrative or trying to mislead the public and shilling for the deep state. Look, there are cases, known cases, where the public has been deeply and terribly misled. It's not even that uncommon, but it doesn't look like this. There's a motive, and there's a thing that you get out of it that makes sense. In this case, I'm saying this doesn't make any sense. If you have the narrative control power that is assigned to Epstein's would-be murderers, you don't even need to kill Epstein in the first place. And if you can squelch the first attempt at killing Epstein, then you can very easily squelch the annoying reports that have come out about the actual killing of Epstein. It doesn't and it just, none of it fits. None of this narrative about him being murdered actually fits with reality. Actually fits with motives, with means, with the would-be perpetrators or with the suspected perpetrators. None of this makes any sense at all. And so, of course, this is where people go after the conspiracy theories the hardest. The ones that have the most energy are the ones that don't make any goddamn sense. Precisely because they're not real conspiracies. If there are real conspiracies, then it's hard to talk about them. You find that the people who talk about them are not mainstream people. There's an aura of danger around talking about them until it's too late for it to matter anymore. And that's not the case here at all. You see, all and sundry talking about them. It doesn't, if you actually understand how false narratives are spread, I don't see how you can believe that this is such a case, that this Epstein situation is a disguised murder. All signs, in my opinion, point to it being a suicide.